Good morning, everybody. Enter the stars, and I've been looking forward to this show today. We're going to look at the famed Vatican nativity scene that emerged on the date of the December 14th eclipse. Now, this is very important. Now, this has already been compared to Darth Vader, alien astronauts. But we're going to look at some other shocking aspects of this nativity scene that you have not heard yet. And these aspects link this scene to ancient Egypt, which were the captors of God's people. And they were teachers of Antichrist philosophy and belief systems. So why would these elements be included in what we are told is the world's Christian leadership, the Vatican? So, what's all the fuss? Well, this right here, is what is called a DJED. D-J-E-D. Let's look at some pictures of the DJED. It's a pillar-like object, and it was worshipped in ancient Egypt as the spine of the bull that they worshipped. Let's look at some other pictures of the DJED here. As you can see, it looks very otherworldly. It's got these vertical bars going across, or a horizontal bars going across vertical bars. And according to sources, it says that it is associated with Osiris, and it represents the backbone. More specifically, the sacrum of the backbone, which is the lowest part of the backbone. The DJED, symbol of stability, base of the sacrum's bull spine. Now, why is this important? Well, you're going to see in just a minute, because the nativity scene seems to mimic some aspects of the DJED. And of course, the DJED also is representative of the obelisk. And of course, these nativity scenes have the obelisk in the background. They're set right in front of the obelisk, as a matter of fact. Now, what is up with the obelisk? Well, here's the obelisk here. You can see it in the background. I don't know if this one came from Egypt itself, but I do know that many of the obelisks around Rome came from ancient Egypt. And why would that be? Well, we're going to get into some of that today. But if you look at these pictures here of this object in the nativity scene, this may represent one of the angels, Joseph and Mary, baby Jesus. They're in the actual barn here, the manger, and this would be like maybe the angel or the star that guided the three wise men to the scene there. And so you have to ask yourself, why is this object look a lot like the ancient Egyptian DJED? Those are the questions we're going to answer this morning. Now, let's get into some more of these ancient Egyptian objects, because it's very weird when you think about how the ancient Egyptians worshipped the spine, the bull's spine. There are other parts of the bull's spine that they worshipped as well. The ankh, for instance, is modeled after the thoracic vertebrae of the bull. Thoracic basically means the part by your chest, so the vertebrae very closest to the heart. When you take one of those vertebrae out of the spine, it actually looks like the shape of an ankh. That's what they were going after, thoracic vertebrae of the bull. So now we have these aspects of the spine, which has eerie similarities to the Kundalini in the worship of the beast. And so the DJED, according to this source, is a fertility cult. And let me search the page for that. it's been referred to as a fertility cult. And there was a ceremony called the raising of the dead. Now, here is where things begin to sound a little creepy. Because Luke Skywalker, when he was on Yoda's home planet, he raised the X-Wing fighter out of the swamp. Well, what does Luke Skywalker have to do with the ancient Jedi? Well, those of you with ears to hear are already hearing the word Jedi inside of the word Jed. Now let's look at some images of Luke Skywalker lifting the X-Wing fighter out of the swamp with the Force. And many of you will remember this if you followed the Star Wars series. But here they are. And he lifts the Jed out of the swamp. And of course, the X-Wing fighter, the main hull, looks like a pillar. It looks like the Jed. Let's look at some other images of it here. Here's a better image of it. There's the X-Wing fighter being lifted out. And I believe what this really was the lifting of the Jed ritual on display by George Lucas. And I'm going to play some clips from Lucas and what I believe is what he was really getting at with all of this Jedi talk. I believe what he was really talking about was Jedediah. Who is Jedediah, Casey? Jedediah was in the Bible. Who was Jedediah? It was the original name of Solomon. Solomon's original name was Jedediah. And remember, Solomon's temple was said to be made without tools or hammers, I believe was the exact quote. So, what is all this about? Well, there are clues in the Old Testament to how this temple could have been built without hammers, without the sound of a hammer. It must have made some kind of way, right? Well, we're going to get into some of that today as well. Now, I'll make a strong delineation between the biblical references and conjecture, okay? Because I don't want to mislead anybody. But we're just getting into some opinions about what all of this stuff means. Here's a shot of Luke. Look at this. This is the pillar. It almost looks like an obelisk with wings. That's what the X-Wing fighter looks like, right? Let's open this image here. It's an obelisk with wings. So let's keep going with this because there's something really weird. Let's do a side-by-side of these Jeds because I want you to really see that the Jed does in fact look like what's being depicted in this nativity scene. Here's a good image of it there. Let's go back to the images of and we're going to get into some other aspects of this nativity scene as well. It's not going to be just all about the Jed, but I wanted you to see the side-by-side of what we're dealing with here and that they were going after this aspect of it. So, back to Solomon. Well, there were what are called stones of light and perfection. Urim and Thummim. Now, it's weird because Uma Thurman was named after this. Now, of course, Hollywood, they love to do knockoffs of what God does that is good. But these two objects are mentioned in the Old Testament. We're going to read about them. Urim and Thummim. And they are called the stones of light and perfection. Here it is right here. Urim and Thummim. And there are some biblical references to these objects. Light and perfection. They were used for judgment. The first reference to Urim and Thummim in the Bible is a description in the book of Exodus concerning the high priest's vestments. The chronologically earliest passages mentioning them, according to textual scholars, is in the book of Hosea, where it implies by reference to the ephod that the Urim and Thummim were fundamental elements in the popular form of the Israelite religion. Consulting the Urim and Thummim was said to be permitted for determining territorial boundaries, and was said to be required in addition to permission from the king or prophet. So they would cast these, and there are some biblical passages here. They would cast them on the ground to uncover the sin of Achan. The sacred lots were used by Joshua. Abiathar joined David, who was then in the cave of Adullam. He remained with David and became priest of the party of which he was the leader. When David ascended the throne of Judah, Abiathar was appointed high priest. So how did they use these Urim and Thummim? Let's get into that. First Samuel is regarded by biblical scholars as the key to understanding the Urim and Thummim. The passage describes an attempt to identify a sinner via divination. Now they call it divination, but when God is telling you what to do, then it's not divination. But they want to apply that label, of course. It says, by repeatedly splitting the people into two groups and identifying which group contains the sinner. So it's a matter of division, dividing things up over and over again. Now, this is going to dovetail into the Russian dolls, which is also being depicted in the nativity scene. We'll get into that a little bit later in the show. But it says in the version of the passage in the Masoretic text, it describes Saul and Jonathan being separated from the rest of the people and lots being cast between them. So this is the purpose of these Urim and Thummim. They are casting of the lots. It says here, Urim and Thummim would indicate Saul and Jonathan, while Thummim would indicate the people. So there was this process that they went through. Now, some scholars take this a step further, and this could be the dark side version of this, and so this is where you got to be careful. But when I was in France about 3 years ago, I put together a video reading from a book about what they say the Urim and Thummim is, the light and perfection. I'm going to play that for you right now after I make sure we're connected. Appears as though we are. Very good. Let's take a look at what we talked about 3 years ago when I was in France. We read this out of a book that I found, or I think Mark gave it to me or had it in his collection. And let's take a look and see what this has to say.
Into the stars, and now it's obvious to me that George Lucas, his inspiration for Star Wars was that of the Kabbalah. Now, the Kabbalistic teachings talk about two stones. One of them was called the Shamir, the lightning stone. And this could cut through solid rock.
Now, obviously, this is the dark side version because it comes out of the Kabbalah. So this is something you would probably not want to believe. But there's always some kind of knockoff of the truth. And this is how these people operate. And this was probably the inspiration for George Lucas's Star Wars. It's apparent to me now that he was a Kabbalist through and through. Let's listen.
The other stone was called the Shatia. And this stone caused the Ark of the Covenant to levitate just inches off the ground. Now, for those Star Wars fans out there, you know that lightsabers they used crystals inside of the lightsabers. And that these lightsabers could cut through very solid objects. We also know that part of being a Jedi was being able to produce anti-gravity properties. Does this sound familiar? Obviously it does, because these two stones cause this. Now, when you lump in the fact that Solomon's original name was Jedediah, which has the first four letters Jedi, and that according to the Kabbalah, they are saying that Solomon wielded these powers in the building of the temple, a picture now emerges. Now, what's unclear to me at this point is, under the dark or the light was Solomon wielding these powers? Apparently it started out good when he was building the temple of God. But we know that later in his life, he fell prey to the dark side. Now this goes all the way back to the very roots of Freemasonry, okay? And these stones were called the stone of perfection and the lightning stone according to Kabbalistic traditions, as you can see here. Now it's interesting because in the Bible, Exodus 28 says, "And thou shalt put in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and the Thummim." These were two stones. And when you translate those words, they mean the very same thing. Light and perfection. Now again, these are gray areas. And I don't claim to know where the light and the dark side fell in this story. Obviously, this goes back to Freemasonry. And obviously, Freemasonry is evil in its current form. And they worship Lucifer. So, they're talking here about the craft, second degree Freemasonry, and so on and so forth. But the fact remains that this seems to be the basis by which George Lucas came up with the entire story of Star Wars. Now this is huge because Star Wars is at the top of the list of science fiction films and legacies of all time.
So I'm going to pause it there because this book I'm reading is The Lost Book of the Sacred Ark, if you're interested in looking it up. But again, this is a Kabbalistic teaching. Some of the stuff they mention is from the Talmud, so this is probably not something that is going to be factual, but it gives us a snapshot into what George Lucas was after.
They are banging Star Wars into your head over and over again. So it's interesting that the roots of this, again, go back to the Bible, Solomon, and even the Kabbalah. Now, one thing is certain. This stone that cut through rock silently and with precision from its own magnificent spear of life was definitely a tool that could have been used to carve all of these stones around the earth. These megalithic structures that fit perfectly without the use of mortar. Stones cut with what is in effect a lightsaber. Now, if this Kabbalah was a more recent writing.
So that's what the clip that I wanted to show you guys. Now, what appears to me to be the case is that if you look at this Jed, they talk about the Jed being a dark side version of the cross. Let me get down to that part here. There's a cross member. They mention a cross member that goes across, and a vertical member. That would be the dark side version of the cross. Why? Because Jesus made his sacrifice on the cross. That is the holy version. And you gain access through the narrow gate only through him. Well, here's the dark side version. This is Kundalini and gaining access through the dark way. Self-worship. Trying to gain eternal life through self-improvement. See the difference? Either you submit to Christ or you basically start promoting and wanting and building up yourself, thinking you can get past the gate by whatever it is that you're doing, right? So that's the difference between this. But they talk about this cross member and everything, and they compare it to the cross, and that's what I think they're getting at here. Now, it also says here it was sometimes also used to represent Osiris himself. Let me find that part in here. And it was often combined with a pair of eyes between the crossbars and holding the crook and flail. Here we go. So here's the knockoff cross. So now you understand why in the heck would they put something like this in a Christian nativity scene? Now let's move on to some of the other aspects of this scene here, because there's also this like space helmet, right? Here it is right here. Space looking helmet. Almost looks like Luke Skywalker's helmet. Let's look it up. X-Wing fighter. X-Wing helmet. There it is. So here's Luke Skywalker's X-Wing fighter helmet. For those of you that watched The Mandalorian, that just came out yesterday, and Luke Skywalker makes an appearance. So there's the helmet. Let's do a side-by-side of this image here, because I believe this is what they were getting at with this. Here it is. See the similarities there? Maybe there's a better image. Here's another image here. This is better. See the similarities? You got that top thing going on. You've got the side things, the side circles going on. Very, very similar. So, now all of this is starting to fit into this Star Wars theme. And, of course, we talked about Jedis, and lo and behold, another one of these images shows this Darth Vader-like helmet. Now, some of you will recognize this helmet because it looks a lot like some of these ancient soldiers. This is the kind of helmets that they wore. You can see it in your side margin there on the left. I pulled up some images of the helmet here. These were used in ancient warfare. You can see the similarities, the eye holes here, compared to the helmet there. Toggle back and forth. So this is kind of weird. So we got this instrument of war. And this reminds me of the Roman soldier who pierced Jesus' side, the centurion. And so you got to ask yourself, is that the centurion's spear right there that he's holding? He's got a shield and a spear. Is this the centurion? And look at the blue and the green associated with copper. The blue, green, the teal. This is oxidized copper, which is the blue bloods standing behind. Weird, right? And who is Luke Skywalker? Is this supposed to be indicative of the Jesus just before the crucifixion? He's holding this orb. I mean, it doesn't get any creepier than this. You also notice on the chest here, this 5-pointed design as he's holding this orb. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there's another angle of it here that might even look a little bit better. There's the wide shot. You can see all the elements. This looks like it's going from the birth, then back here to the death. So it goes from right to left. Here's a great shot of the Luke Skywalker with Darth Vader standing behind him and the 5-pointed Baphomet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, holding an orb. There's some dots on here. Maybe it's a star map. I don't know. We're not going to break this down all the way, of course, because it's just not worth putting the time and energy into it. But at least you can see that there's a lot more to this than anyone's really looking at encoded in this. And of course, there's sheep and turkey surrounding him, which probably really represents the barn that they were in, that they arrived at, Mary and Joseph, at the birth of Jesus. Now, you also notice, let's look at some of the wide shots of this. Russian dolls seems to come to mind, doesn't it? As you're looking at these figurines, they look like Russian dolls. And we talked about Russian dolls a little bit earlier. Things within things, dividing and dividing again, which was the casting of the lots of the Urim and Thummim, right? And look at these Russian dolls. Now, I believe this is mockery, because if you think about Russian dolls, one huge discovery that we made on this channel was that there are what are called nested truths. Let me give you one example. We've talked about many of them, but one example is the tree of life. The tree of life is a tree, obviously, and we are all trees from the tree of life. What do you mean, Casey? Well, you have limbs, you have a crown, which is the top of your head, you have a trunk, which is the core of your body. And there are biblical passages that talk about people's eyes being open and seeing people as trees. What is the tree really? Well, it's the narrow gate back to the tree, up through the trunk, the stem, to get back to the tree of life. Right now, we're stuck in the tree of good and evil, of the knowledge of good and evil, where duality rules, keeps us separated, keeps us fighting with one another, keeps us confused by choosing red or blue, when in actuality, all that really matters is good and evil. And we don't see the true good and evil. And so what the devil does is he creates a fake good and evil. So he tells you your brother on this other side of the aisle is evil. And he creates a paradigm that's a false paradigm. So that's an example of what is called nested realities, things within things that tell us the truths about the universe. Now, one very simple nested reality, and actually the basis by which God created our universe, would be the nested reality of atomic structures. When you look at the very basic atoms of the universe, how God created all of this, they're what are called octaves. They are shells within shells of electrons, starting out with the very basic elements, basic shells of the electrons with the very basic elements. They just have a few in the nucleus and a few electrons orbiting the nucleus. And then as the elements build on the periodic table, they keep adding octaves and shells. It's Russian dolls. That is the truth of our universe. And if you can start to conceptualize reality in this way, then you can see the patterns of reality more clearly. So obviously, this is mockery in this nativity scene, because they're basically saying the bloodline of Christ was Russian dolls. And it was very carefully protected by God, the bloodline of Christ, down to the birth of Christ, so that he could be born pure and save humanity. So now you can see clearly what this scene is really all about. They're showing the Russian dolls of the progression of his sacrifice, and he's amongst the farm animals. Bizarre. And what is this really about? Well, it's the curse of the dust. What is that? It's the endless recycling of humanity. When we die, we turn to dust. From that dust grows trees and food, and we're basically recycled. And it's a cycle, it just goes over and over and over again. And so therefore you can't make something pure, you can't make something eternal from already cursed dust. Does that make sense? This is why we don't live forever in this reality. We don't live forever because you can't make something. Okay, let me give you an example. You make a cake out of old flour, it's going to taste like old flour, right? No matter how great all the other ingredients are, you're making it out of a bad ingredient. And that's the same thing going on with this reality and the cycles of life. You start out with something tainted, and it's going to be tainted until it's remade in God's image again, when you're reborn in Christ. And that is when it gets fixed through Christ, being born again in Christ. Not now. There's no way you can fix yourself. nor should you want to, because you were made out of substandard building materials. Let's call it that way. Okay? So, that's an explanation of the nativity scene at the Vatican. Very dark, very evil. They're laughing at the fact that they know the secrets that they've held from us. What secrets am I talking about? All the secrets we just talked about on today's show. God gave that to us as a gift so we can better understand Him and love Him. Now, when you read the Bible, read it through those eyes. Read it understanding that there are nested truths. Another nested truth would be the truth of the number 40. How the number 40 continued on from the very beginnings of the Bible, starting with Noah, the 40 days and nights in the flood. And the number 40 always seems to be surrounded or in very close proximity to water and resetting and rebirth, right? A funneling of the human race into one and then coming out the other side, which is exactly what happened to Noah. 40 days and nights it rained in the waters, baptized in the waters. And then the rainbow appeared, the dove took off, never came back. And then we, of course, had the ancient Hebrew Israelites going through the wilderness, 40 years, right? They went through the Red Sea. So again, water. And then there was a time in the wilderness. Well, Jesus went through the exact same thing, that 40 days in the wilderness, and then baptized in the waters. The dove returned. You see all these nested truths, and unless you begin to see and understand this, you're going to only get 25% of what the Bible is really trying to tell you. Okay? So, hope you guys enjoyed the show and that breakdown. Let me go into the chat here. We'll be back tomorrow with a breakdown of 19 years ago and what happened. And that there was a dark winter exercise 19 years ago that seemed to be almost exactly what we're going through right now. So we're going to get into that. And maybe Biden's slip of the tongue, giving up the goods, giving up the operation we're going through right now is what I believe happened when he said those words, that we're in for a dark winter. All right, let's go into the chat here. 9 months equals 40 weeks. Yes, Victor. And that's another nested truth. It's the 40 weeks of gestation of the child in the womb. When a woman becomes pregnant, after her last menstrual cycle, there are exactly 40 weeks that child is bathed in the waters, right? In the wilderness. And all of this connects together. It all connects together. These are called nested truths. Okay? And it's like Russian dolls. Okay. Let's see here. I love each and every one of you. All the glory goes to God, you guys. I'm just a guy, all right, that cares. And if anyone that cares can understand this stuff, and that's what we're here. I want to help you guys understand this stuff too. When Jesus was okay, that went by too fast. Sorry. Entropy proves creation. There's an amazing video here on YouTube showing the electron shells. Let's see if we can find it. Of the atoms. Atom electron shells. And it really demonstrates, it's a graphic that really demonstrates this Russian dolls, okay? Because it builds. Let's see if we can find, oh, here it is right here. So, I'm going to change the speed on this. I don't want to get kind of copyright or anything. We're going to go to 2-speed. Watch this. This starts with the basic first elements, hydrogen, and it just keeps building. It's literally Russian dolls as you go up in the periodic table of elements. So as you can see, there's really no difference between the elements other than their structure, how many shells and electrons are rotating. And that's pretty amazing. We included that graphic in one of our videos showing how this works. But they just keep dropping them down on top of each other. And this is our reality. This is how God created us. Now, many people believe that this is all held together by sound. And I truly believe that. I believe it's the resonant voice of God speaking life into creation. And it's like a humming. There's angels singing up there and God singing, and it's holding all of this together. And this is why I tell people, if you don't believe in God, he's holding your very fabric of your body together. Is that something you really want to start doubting? You know, he dwells within you. You are the creation. And maybe this breath of life was like a song. He breathed the sound in to Adam, which began the cascade of life. So, you know, there are lots and lots of examples of this, what are called somatics. And somatics shows how when you send sound through the medium of sand, it self-organizes. Let's look at some somatic images, videos here. Oh, see why. And see what we can come up with. I mean, look at this. All this is sound sent through sand. And it self-organizes. Not self. We know where it comes from, right? It's God. It's a reflection of God's voice. And these become the microstructures of creation. If you look at a microscope, you'll see these shapes and patterns existing in the very creation. This is our reality. So, that's about it. Now, we did a video talking about Saturn, and Saturn has a frequency to it. And when that frequency was sent through this, it created the hex, the hexagon. And that's the hex. That's why there's a hexagon at the North Pole of Saturn. It's sound frequency. All right? There's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And so I'm hoping you guys are seeing that. So thumbs up this video, share it with everybody you can. I appreciate that all of you showed up this morning. We'll be back on here tomorrow. We can answer a couple questions if you guys want before we get off of here. Just the chat's going by so fast. I guess I can stop it if I wanted to. Okay. Sound affects the water particles. Yes, Carlene. Yeah, we did another video on this about the frequency in hertz for like music and stuff, and how they changed it away from, I think it was 444. They changed it to 444. It used to be 432. You'll have to look that up, but they changed it because that was more of like the God frequency, and they changed it to a more evil frequency. So they know about this. They know what's going on. Okay. Yeah, that's probably where good vibrations came from, Marion. So you know. Jeremiah 10, no Christmas tree. I agree 100%, Zarlodius. It says right there in Jeremiah 10, do not cut a tree down and decorate it with ornaments. A lot of people try to wiggle out of that, and it's pretty clear and direct. Now, we're all in our own stages. I don't judge people for what they do. I was a lot more judgmental early on in my walk, and I realized that we're on a continuum of finding God and getting closer to Him. And some practices that people do, they aren't able to give up right away. But when faced with the truth, God will start working on your heart, and eventually you'll get it. Okay? You'll get it eventually. And then now all music is based on the 440, whereas originally the 432 was the better frequency. All right. So let's get into this Christmas tree a little bit. Why would God forbid people to cut down a tree and decorate it with ornaments, as spoken in Jeremiah 10, I believe? Well, we just talked about what a tree represents, right? An evergreen tree. What would that represent? Well, that would represent children, would it not? Because it's a little baby tree. And decorating with ornaments, what would that represent? Maybe putting the fruit on the tree? See, it's all mockery. You're killing a tree. And I'm not speaking in terms of like an environmentalist. I'm speaking in terms of the symbolism behind it, the spiritual symbolism behind it. It's a ritual. And some people are going to hate me right now because you've already got your trees up. And look, that's just the way it is. Like I said, I'm not judging you. You're on a continuum of truth. You're going to have to face some of this stuff eventually in your life. That's how God works. He makes you face down the sin in your life. All of us have it, myself included. And so one day you're going to have to face it down and come to terms with it and deal with it. Right? Because it's going to start to affect your life. And what they've done is they've cast a spell over all of us, making us think we need these holidays to be happy. You know how many people take their life on a holiday because they didn't get to see their children on a holiday, or because they didn't get invited by family? There's so much wasted emotional instability when it comes to these holidays that have been created for us by the elite. Why? To keep us locked into debt, keep us locked into this false worship. And so that's just the truth of it. I'm sorry if some people don't want to hear that, but it's just the truth of it. So I'll tell you my own personal example. You know, I used to be so sad during the holidays after my divorce, and because, you know, this is what I did for many years of the marriage, was we would all have Christmas, or we would all go to the pumpkin patch, or we would all, you know, carve the pumpkin and all these things, right? And it becomes a tradition, and there's all these feelings and emotions associated with these events. I remember lamenting and sorrow and deep sorrow, not being able to see the children, you know, during these times, missing the family unit and all these things. And then I woke up one day, and through the discovery of all this, I realized that that was all coming from the enemy. The enemy was pushing these kinds of things down onto you to keep you distracted. It's a lot of wasted energy, all right? We should be doing these things every day for each other. When you think of someone and you want to do something special, you just do it. Shouldn't be a date on which you do it. That's the simple truth of all of this. Now, before we end the show, and I got to be vague with this because I have a show planned. I'm going to have a special guest from the country of Sierra Leone. And he is a journalist, or was a journalist there, and now lives in the States here. I'm not going to disclose his name, but this young man was witness to some of the atrocities that happened in Sierra Leone. This will be one of the greatest interviews we've ever done, because he actually witnessed some of the things that happened with his own eyes. We're talking about Ebola. We're talking about diamonds. We're talking about gold. Now, why isn't the mainstream media, the social justice warriors, all concerned about all the other things, while there is so much suffering in Africa? And I'm not talking about starvation. This young man was a 4.0 student and turned his back. Here's the way it works in Africa. They have students, and I'm going to let him speak to much of this, but they have schools and colleges. And the students who excel the most are given the positions of power in the country. But it comes at a cost. They're given the delegate positions and government positions and all these things. It all goes by how well you do in college. That's how it works in Africa, or at least West Africa. He explained all this to me last night. And he says that then you're showered with gifts and things. I mean, even to the point where they can set you up with a wife, all this stuff that they're given. But then they become puppets. And he turned his back on this, came to America. But he explained to me some of the things that had happened. He talked to me, and I'm just going to give you a couple of bullet points that just from my memory of our discussion last night. He said to me that the people, the prospectors from these multi-billion-dollar corporations would come to his country with their equipment and tools. And he said that they had this thing, the scope, that they looked down with their eye into the ground. And then that they would discover a diamond, or a diamond place where there's diamond. He says when it rains there, that all the children run out into the hills, and there are diamonds literally just laying on the ground. He goes, but the value of those diamonds for him and his people in his own country are very close to the value of a bead or a penny. They're worth nothing because it is against the law for those people to take that diamond out of that country to get any worth from it. It is against the law for them to sell that diamond for any worth to anyone who wants it. How sad is that? This is what we're doing to the African people in West Africa. This is what's happening. And he said that after these prospectors would come in from these multi-billion-dollar corporations, it wouldn't take long for the entire country, or parts of the country, their area, to be quarantined and locked down. Is this sounding familiar? Locked down. They were forced to stay in their homes. Then, lo and behold, an Ebola outbreak would happen. And everything that we had been talking about on this channel, about the Red Cross and the people not liking them there, is absolutely true. When the Red Cross would come into town, they would be run out of town. People did not trust the Red Cross. And he truly believes, and saw with his own eyes, there was a pattern to these gold and diamond discoveries and outbreaks in certain communities. He's going to share all that with us. Very well-spoken young man, but has a bit of an accent. But Sierra Leone is a British colony, and so they speak English there, but British English. Now, what else was happening over there? Well, the corporations can deal and mine all the diamonds and gold they want, and get them out of the country and make billions of dollars. But the people that live there, even if it's their own land, he says they use diamonds and gold as decoration on their walls. That's how it has no value in their country because of what's happened to these people. This is the biggest story that I can think of on the history of this channel that needs to be told, that is not being told by our mainstream media. Now, this young man was also involved in independent investigative journalism. So, guess what? And I'll end the show with this. He has images and photos. He might even have some video footage of a caravan of UN trucks. And they were heading out of town. They had lifted a lockdown. Everyone came out of their houses and they had accidentally lifted the lockdown a day too soon. And these caravan of UN trucks was headed out of town. Now, this is the kind of stuff that can get a person like me hurt. Okay. But you wait till you see the proof. Okay. Wait till you see the proof. He's got it all. Now, that's why I got to protect this young man's identity. But he said a little boy ran out in the street. And he goes, one thing we can say about the West and the UN is they do care about children. He said the little boy ran out in the street in front of the caravan and the UN truck veered off the road and flipped over. And guess what was in the back of the UN truck? It was loaded with gold. Spilled out of the back of the truck. He said everyone grabbed their cameras and phones and was taking pictures of this. And he says he has some footage. So we'll see. We'll get that footage. I'll play it on the show here. That is straight up corruption. Straight up. He says anytime a discovery is made, they bring war to his country, they bring famine, they bring disease. And that's his reality. So, I'm excited to be able to do that show. I almost forgot to mention that to you. And I was going to wait, but it's too important. Okay, it's too important. Story needs to be told. So, I love each and every one of you. Be saved today if you haven't. And I'll talk to you guys next time.